seem to be that concerned about his missing wife, at least according to this man and other people in the area. And this is what he said to Fox Digital. So the incident happened Saturday at 7:30 p.m. He came ashore at 4 a.m. The search and rescue took him out for 3 or 4 hours and brought him back to his boat. He sat on his boat for almost 24 hours until search and rescue brought him his dinghy back. So they're saying he just sat on the boat for 24 hours while Lynette was still missing. At no point did he really look at the situation and give anybody any more details than he had at the beginning when he was supposedly in shock. Even if he accepts the fact his wife is gone, does he not want closure? Does he not want redemption? So this is what Blaine Stevenson, according to Fox Digital, a friend of Brian Hooker's.
For 48 hours, federal agents watched the 46-foot luxury sailboat cut through the open Atlantic, moving steadily away from the turquoise waters of the Bahamas and heading straight for the United States coastline. They did not intercept it immediately, nor did they give any indication to the crew on board that they were being monitored from above by sophisticated aerial surveillance assets flying out of Air Station Miami. Instead, special agents with the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service waited patiently, tracking the vessel as it covered mile after mile of deep ocean, allowing the boat to reach a precise position approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Melbourne, Florida. It was there, out in the open sea, that federal authorities launched a complex, highly coordinated interdiction operation, swooping in with surface and aviation assets to seize the vessel under the authority of an active criminal investigation. This was not a standard maritime check or a routine safety inspection, but rather a targeted strike to capture the most critical piece of physical evidence in a case that has horrified the true crime community and left a family desperate for answers. The vessel, known as the Soulmate, was the floating home of Lynette Hooker and her husband Brian Hooker, and its dramatic high-sea seizure marks a massive escalation in the federal probe into the mysterious disappearance of the Michigan mother who vanished into the dark waters of the Caribbean more than a month ago. Plus two, when the federal agents boarded the Soulmate in the choppy waters off Florida, the operation took an unexpected turn that almost feels like a bizarre twist of fate, as the vessel suddenly and completely lost engine power right in the middle of the ocean interdiction. Left drifting and powerless in the Atlantic, the sea sailboat had to be immediately taken under tow by the Coast Guard cutter Winslow Greaser, which dragged the massive craft through the waves before transferring the towing operation to a specialized crew from Coast Guard Station Fort Pierce. As the boat was pulled through the Fort Pierce inlet and secured to the local military dock, local onlookers and independent investigators captured striking drone footage and photographs that revealed a chilling sight, as bright yellow crime scene tape was aggressively wrapped around the entire perimeter of the sleek white vessel.
Your stepdad, I mean, what raises the alarm bells?
For one, he's already made this threat 2 years ago that this exact thing was going to happen to her, that he would make sure this would happen to her. And he's threatened it, I'm pretty sure, multiple times, and has done actions to her that have hurt her. So the fact that this is happening now is kind of coincidental, I guess, or it's just funny because you said that you were going to do this and now it's happening. So why wouldn't I just believe your story? I would need more answers than just believing your story at this point.
Yeah, and you were very quick to say you didn't believe the story. I mean, it right from the get-go, it seemed like.
Yeah.
Did your mom ever say anything to you about him?
2 years ago, when they broke up in 2024, I went to go visit her in Florida, and she told me that he choked her out and threatened to kill her and throw her overboard so that nobody could find her. So she immediately left after that fight.
For weeks, the public had been told that Lynette Hooker simply fell out of a small dinghy during a late-night ride in rough weather, an unfortunate marine accident in a beautiful paradise. But the presence of that federal crime scene tape tells a radically different story. Federal forensic teams have spent days going on and off the vessel, carrying away boxes of potential evidence, documenting the interior with specialized photography, and sweeping every square inch for blood, digital data, and signs of violent struggle. Stay with me because this is where it gets complicated, and it is precisely where the narrative provided by Brian Hooker begins to crumble under the sheer weight of federal scrutiny and new witness statements. Up until this point, Brian Hooker had maintained absolute control over the timeline, telling authorities that his wife fell overboard around 7:30 on the evening of April 4th near Aunt Pat's Bay, taking the keys to the dinghy down into the dark water with her and leaving him completely helpless to restart the motor. According to his original statement, this forced him to spend the next 8.5 hours desperately paddling through the dark, fighting rough currents and high winds before finally making landfall at Marsh Harbor around 4 o'clock the following morning to sound the alarm. But as the Coast Guard seized the Soulmate, an entirely new and deeply disturbing piece of information emerged from a close friend of the couple, Blaine Stevenson, who broke his silence to reveal a shocking 24-hour gap in Brian's behavior that he believes points directly to something far more sinister than an accident.
What did you learn while you were there? Was there anything that stood out to you while you were talking to people, or?
Like, after this happened?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant afterwards. Yeah.
Just that everyone basically had the same thing to say, that they don't really believe his story because they know the waters around there and it's pretty shallow. Like, some places they could just walk and be fine. And they were pretty close to shore where she could have swam a couple feet and stood up. So they're all basically saying about the same thing.
Stevenson revealed to federal investigators and national news outlets that after local search and rescue teams took Brian out to look for Lynette for just 3 or 4 hours on that first morning, they brought him back to the Soulmate and returned his dinghy to him, expecting him to continue frantically searching for his missing wife. Instead of searching, instead of screaming her name into the wind or utilizing the dinghy to scour the shallow waters of the surrounding keys, Brian Hooker allegedly sat on the sailboat completely alone for nearly 24 hours, doing absolutely nothing to find the woman he claimed to love. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself why a husband whose wife has just vanished into the ocean less than a day prior would choose to sit silently in the cabin of his boat for an entire day while the rest of the island community was out risking their lives in the water trying to save her. Stevenson openly challenged Brian's behavior, publicly asking if Brian did not want closure, if he did not want redemption, and revealing that he had sent a direct message to Brian demanding that he finally tell the truth to Lynette's grieving family who had trusted him with her life. This devastating revelation of a 24-hour period of complete inactivity completely contradicts the heartbroken Facebook message Brian posted just days after the disappearance, where he claimed that continuing to search for his beloved Lynette was his sole focus and that unpredictable seas had driven them tragically apart. This changes everything we thought we knew about the immediate aftermath of the incident, shifting the focus from a frantic, tragic rescue attempt to a cold, calculated waiting game played out on the deck of the Soulmate. The suspicion deepening around Brian Hooker is not just fueled by his strange behavior in the hours after the incident, but by the chilling words of Lynette's own daughter, Carly Aylesworth, who has come forward with horrifying allegations regarding what was really happening behind closed doors on that luxury sailboat. In an emotionally raw and devastating interview, Carly revealed that this current nightmare is not a sudden accident, but rather the terrifying fulfillment of explicit, literal threat that Brian Hooker had made to her mother exactly 2 years prior during a volatile breakup in 2014. Carly recounted how she had traveled to Florida to visit her mother during that separation, and Lynette had confessed to her in a moment of pure terror that Brian had physically choked her out during a massive fight before looking her in the eyes and threatening to kill her and throw her body overboard into the ocean so that nobody would ever be able to find her. The fact that Lynette has now vanished under those exact, precise circumstances is a coincidence that Carly completely refuses to accept, stating bluntly that Brian told the family exactly what he was going to do to her mother, and now it has actually happened. This is where things get serious, because Carly's testimony completely shatters the image of Brian Hooker as a grieving, innocent husband and exposes a long, documented history of domestic volatility and alleged physical abuse. As we absorb the gravity of these new federal developments, and the haunting statements from those who knew the couple best, I want to pause and ask you to weigh in on this rapidly changing situation in the comment section below. When you look at the federal seizure of the Soulmate, the sudden revelation of the 24-hour gap where no searching was done, and the terrifying history of threats to throw Lynette overboard, what do you believe truly happened on the night of April 4th? Do you believe the official story of a tragic dinghy accident can still hold water? Or do you believe federal authorities are currently sitting on forensic evidence inside that sailboat that means criminal charges are absolutely imminent? Please share your theories, your observations, and your thoughts below, because your voice and your attention help keep the memory of Lynette Hooker alive and ensure that this case cannot be swept under the rug by those who want it forgotten. If you believe that this story deserves national attention and that a grieving daughter deserves the absolute truth about what happened to her mother, please take a brief moment to like this video, share it with others in the true crime community, and subscribe to the channel so you can follow every step of this ongoing federal investigation as it unfolds. The story that Brian Hooker presented to the Royal Bahamian Police Force was initially enough to keep them from filing immediate charges, though they were suspicious enough to take the extraordinary step of holding him in a local jail cell for 5 full days of intense interrogation before ultimately releasing him due to a lack of immediate physical evidence. The moment he was released from Bahamian custody, Brian's actions once again raised alarm bells for Lynette's family, as he almost immediately fled the Bahamas on a commercial flight back to the United States, despite having previously vowed to the local community that he would never leave the islands until his wife was found. His defense attorney later claimed that he returned to his home state of Michigan to care for his ailing mother. But his departure left a bitter taste in the mouths of local residents and investigators who felt he was running away from the very waters where his wife had vanished. What Brian likely did not anticipate was that leaving the Bahamas would not protect him from the reach of justice, as his departure simply cleared the way for the United States federal government, specifically the Coast Guard Investigative Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to take complete control of the case. By entering international waters and attempting to bring the Soulmate back to Florida using a hired captain, the vessel entered the jurisdiction of federal agents who had been quietly building a massive criminal case from the moment the disappearance was reported. The transition of the investigation from local Bahamian authorities to the United States federal apparatus marks a critical turning point that completely reshapes the landscape of this case. When Brian Hooker boarded that commercial flight back to Michigan, he may have believed the immediate danger of arrest had passed, but in reality, his departure triggered a massive, multi-agency response within the American government. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Service does not operate like a standard local police department. They possess global reach, specialized maritime forensic units, and the authority to conduct complex counter-surveillance operations across international borders. From the moment the Soulmate left its mooring in the Bahamas, under the control of a hired captain who was completely unrelated to the incident, federal agents were orchestrating a trap. They allowed the vessel to traverse international waters, quietly gathering intelligence and tracking its movements through high-altitude aviation assets, waiting for the exact moment the boat crossed into a zone where federal search warrants could be executed with maximum legal authority. The sheer scale of the interdiction operation, involving multiple surface vessels and aviation tracking from Sector Miami, indicates that federal prosecutors were not just looking to inspect the boat. They were executing a seizure based on a high probability of finding evidence related to a felony. To truly understand why the federal government's intervention is so devastating to the accidental drowning theory, one must look at the specific maritime geography of the area where Lynette Hooker supposedly vanished. Brian Hooker claimed that his wife fell from their small dinghy near Aunt Pat's Bay, an area situated close to Hope Town in the Abaco chain of the Bahamas, a region known for its highly treacherous but also distinctly shallow and clear waters. Local boaters, fishermen, and residents who have spent decades navigating those exact coordinates immediately expressed intense skepticism regarding Brian's timeline and his description of the water conditions that night. According to local navigation experts, many sections of the waters surrounding Aunt Pat's Bay and the path toward Marsh Harbor are incredibly shallow, so much so that during certain tides, a person could easily stand up or wade through the water to safety. The idea that a grown woman, who is described by her family as an incredibly fit, active individual who practiced yoga and ran regularly, could simply disappear without a trace in a shallow bay within swimming distance of the shore has never made sense to the people who know those waters best. When Carly traveled to the Bahamas after her mother's disappearance, she discovered that the local community was almost entirely united in their disbelief of the husband's story, with many offering testimonies that the weather on the evening of April 4th was far calmer than the unpredictable, violent seas Brian described in his public statements. Stay with me, because this is where the timeline completely fractures, and the contradictions between Brian's statements and the physical reality of maritime travel become impossible to ignore. Brian claimed that after Lynette fell overboard at 7:30 in the evening, he spent over 8 hours paddling the dinghy toward Marsh Harbor, arriving at 4 o'clock the next morning to report the incident. Ask yourself why that detail matters, and think about the physical effort required to paddle a dinghy for 8 consecutive hours in what he claimed were rough, wind-driven seas. If the weather was as violent and unpredictable as he stated, paddling a small, unpowered watercraft against the wind and current for miles would be an almost superhuman feat. Yet when he arrived at the harbor, witnesses did not describe a man who was physically exhausted to the point of collapse. Furthermore, the revelation from Blaine Stevenson that Brian then sat on the Soulmate for 24 hours after a brief, initial search completely undermines the psychological profile of a panicked, grieving spouse. In standard maritime disappearances, the surviving partner typically has to be physically restrained from entering the water, remaining on the scene for days, demanding that every available resource be deployed to find their missing loved one. Brian's choice to sit isolated in his cabin while the local community scoured the waves is a behavioral anomaly that federal investigators are undoubtedly analyzing with intense scrutiny. The contrast between what Brian Hooker was doing on a sailboat and what was happening on the social media landscape during those critical days reveals a deeply unsettling dynamic. While sitting on his boat in the Bahamas, Brian took to Facebook to publish a carefully worded statement, expressing heartbreak over a boat accident and claiming that finding his beloved Lynette was his sole focus. He painted a picture of a tragic, romantic exploration that ended in an unavoidable act of nature, attempting to control the public narrative before the family could even process the news. But this polished public persona stood in direct, jarring contrast to the reality being uncovered by Lynette's daughter, who was beginning to piece together the terrifying truth of her mother's final years. Carly's relationship with her stepfather had always been strained, recalling him as a harsh disciplinarian who dominated the household and showed a deeply volatile temper whenever he was irritated or challenged. As she looked at the photos of her mother smiling on the deck of the Soulmate, photos that the public viewed as evidence of a dream life, Carly knew that those images masked a deeply abusive dynamic that her mother had tried desperately to escape just 2 years prior. The revelation that Brian had previously choked Lynette and explicitly threatened to throw her body overboard so she would never be found completely recontextualizes every single detail of the dinghy accident story, transforming it from a tragedy into a potential blueprint for a pre-planned crime. Think about that for a moment, and consider the immense courage it took for Carly to stand before national television cameras and openly accuse her stepfather of domestic terror while her mother was still missing in a foreign country. She did not hesitate. She did not mince words, and she refused to follow the standard script of a quiet, grieving relative who leaves the investigation entirely to the police. From the very beginning, Carly recognized that the 5 days her stepfather spent in a Bahamian jail cell were not a routine detaining, but a clear sign that international investigators recognized something was profoundly wrong with his story. Her frustration grew exponentially when Bahamian authorities were forced to release him due to jurisdictional limitations and a lack of immediate forensic testing capabilities on the island, allowing him to walk onto an airplane and fly away from the crime scene. It was during this period of profound despair, around Mother's Day and her mother's birthday, that Carly's public messages captured the heart of the true crime community, drawing the attention of national journalists like Ashley Banfield, who began dedicating night after night to exposing the cracks in the case. This relentless public pressure, combined with Carly's refusal to stay silent, ensured that the United States federal government could not treat Lynette's disappearance as a simple overseas accident, forcing federal agencies to deploy their most sophisticated investigative assets. As we dive deeper into the dark history of the relationship between Lynette and Brian Hooker, I want to invite you to share your perspective on these psychological and behavioral inconsistencies in the comment section below. Do you believe that a history of domestic violence and an explicit threat to throw a spouse overboard is enough to warrant immediate federal charges, even before a body has been recovered by search teams? How do you interpret Brian's sudden decision to hire a captain to sail his boat back to Florida while he remained hidden away in Michigan, claiming to care for an ailing relative? Let us know your thoughts below, because the collective analysis of this community often highlights details that standard news reports overlook, and keeping this conversation active is the most powerful tool we have to demand accountability. If you are committed to seeing justice for Lynette Hooker and want to ensure that her family's fight for truth continues to receive the platform it deserves, please take a second to hit the like button and share this update within your true crime networks. Your continued support and engagement are what allow us to produce these deep dive investigative updates, keeping the spotlight firmly fixed on those who believe they can escape the reach of the law by crossing international waters. The physical arrival of the Soulmate at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce completely altered the nature of this investigation, transforming a distant maritime mystery in the Bahamas into an active federal crime scene on American soil. For days, independent journalists and local news crews watched from across the water as federal forensic technicians, dressed in protective gear, meticulously processed the vessel. The application of crime scene tape around the sleek white hull of a luxury sailboat is a rare and extreme measure, indicating that investigators possess probable cause to believe that a felony was committed aboard that craft. Specialized units within the Coast Guard Investigative Service, likely collaborating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's evidence response teams, have been seen transferring numerous bags and boxes from the cabin into secure transport vehicles. In a modern maritime investigation, a vessel like the Soulmate is essentially a floating hard drive of digital and physical data. Forensic teams look far beyond visible signs of a struggle. They utilize specialized chemical sprays to detect washed-away bloodstains, check for structural anomalies, and most importantly, extract data from the boat's internal navigation systems, GPS plotters, and marine radios to reconstruct an absolute, unalterable timeline of the vessel's movements. This digital forensic extraction is precisely where the official narrative provided by Brian Hooker is expected to face its most brutal test. While a human being can alter their story, misremember times, or fabricate weather conditions to suit a specific defense, the satellite-linked navigation equipment of a modern luxury sailboat does not lie. The electronic systems on the Soulmate would have recorded the exact coordinates, engine hours, and sea conditions at 7:30 on the evening of April 4th, providing an undeniable record of where the sailboat was anchored when Lynette supposedly fell from the dinghy. If the boat's internal GPS data reveals that the Soulmate was positioned miles away from where Brian claimed, or if the onboard sensors show that the marine environment was calm and stable rather than violent and unpredictable, the accidental drowning defense collapses entirely. Furthermore, federal agents are intensely focused on the dinghy itself, the small auxiliary watercraft that Brian claimed to have paddled for over 8 hours to reach Marsh Harbor. Investigators are analyzing the physical wear on the dinghy's oars, the fuel levels in its outboard motor, and the electronic key systems to determine if the engine was genuinely inoperable or if the entire scenario of being trapped without a motor was a fabricated delay meant to allow the ocean currents to wash critical evidence away. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative shifts from standard suspicion to a deeply calculated timeline of avoidance. According to the interview with Carly and her boyfriend Steve, the family was kept entirely in the dark regarding the federal government's plan to intercept and seized the Soulmate as it crossed into United States waters. This level of operational secrecy is highly indicative of an ongoing grand jury investigation, where federal prosecutors keep their tactical movements completely confidential to prevent a target from destroying evidence or fleeing jurisdiction. Carly revealed that she only learned about the dramatic high-seas seizure of her mother's boat through national television broadcasts, illustrating the wall of silence that federal investigators have erected around the case as they build their absolute narrative. Ask yourself why that detail matters, and consider the profound isolation of a daughter who must watch her mother's home, the very boat her mother paid for and dreamed of living on, being treated as a federal crime scene, while the primary witness remains a free man thousands of miles away in Michigan. The fact that the boat was being sailed back to Florida by a hired captain, while Brian remained completely separate from the vessel, suggests a deliberate attempt by the husband to distance himself from the physical environment where his wife was last seen alive. The behavioral contrast between Brian Hooker's statements and the testimonies of the local Bahamian community continues to provide a devastating critique of the accidental defense. In her extensive conversations with local residents around Hopetown, Carly uncovered an entirely different perspective on the geography of the disappearance, learning that the specific areas Brian claimed to have navigated are notoriously shallow and heavily trafficked by local mariners. Local boaters expressed profound bewilderment at the idea that a seasoned individual living on a sailboat full-time could not navigate those clear waters or find immediate assistance in an island community where maritime help is always readily available. The revelation from Brian's friend, Blaine Stevenson, regarding the 24-hour period where Brian allegedly sat inactive on the boat instead of joining search parties, aligns perfectly with the family's belief that a deliberate delay occurred. In true crime investigations, the concept of a delayed report or a period of inexplicable inactivity immediately signals to law enforcement that an individual may have been managing a scene, creating an alibi, or waiting for environmental factors to eliminate physical clues. When this behavioral pattern is viewed alongside Carly's terrifying disclosure that Brian had explicitly threatened to choke Lynette and throw her overboard 2 years prior, the timeline takes on an incredibly dark and premeditated tone. Think about that for a moment and reflect on the psychological burden carried by Lynette Hooker during her final journey into the Caribbean. According to Carly, her mother loved being on that boat more than anything, practicing yoga on the deck, running along the beaches of every port they visited, and utilizing her immense crafting skills to sew custom windows and biminis for the vessel. The Soulmate was supposed to be a sanctuary of freedom and exploration, a retirement dream realized through hard work and a passion for the open sea. Yet, beneath that vibrant exterior and the beautiful photos shared with the world, Lynette was living aboard a confined space with a partner who had reportedly threatened to make her disappear in the middle of the ocean where no one could ever find her. This terrifying realization completely changes how the public views the couple's final weeks in the Bahamas, transforming every beautiful travel photo into a haunting record of a woman trapped in a highly volatile and potentially lethal environment. Carly's willingness to expose these painful family secrets has completely shifted the momentum of the investigation, ensuring that the narrative is no longer controlled by a polished Facebook post, but by the cold, hard reality of documented domestic terror. As we analyze these harrowing structural details and the ongoing forensic processing at Fort Pierce, I want to invite you to drop your theories in the comment section below. Do you believe the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service intercepted the boat because they received specific information from the hired captain, or do you think they have been tracking the vessel's communication systems from the moment it departed the Bahamas? How significant do you find the fact that the boat completely lost engine power during the federal seizure out in the Atlantic? Let us know what you think happened behind the scenes, because your perspective adds to a national conversation that refuses to let this case go cold. If you believe that Lynette Hooker's story deserves to be told with absolute professional integrity and that her family deserves full justice, please take a quick moment to subscribe to the channel and share this video across your social platforms. By expanding the reach of this investigative update, we ensure that the pressure on federal authorities remains intense demanding that every single piece of data extracted from the Soulmate is scrutinized to the absolute limit of modern forensic science. The focus of the entire investigation now rests squarely within the walls of the federal forensic laboratories, where the items removed from the Soulmate are undergoing exhaustive scientific analysis. Every piece of fabric, every length of rope, and every digital device recovered from that sailboat represents a potential piece of the puzzle that federal prosecutors need to secure a grand jury indictment. In cases where a body has not yet been recovered, the legal standard for bringing murder or manslaughter charges is exceptionally high, requiring prosecutors to prove a victim's death through circumstantial and forensic evidence alone. This is exactly why the Coast Guard Investigative Service and the FBI are being so intensely meticulous with the processing of the boat at Station Fort Pierce, knowing that a single microscopic trace of washed blood or a deleted text message could be the definitive proof that changes everything. Investigators are reportedly focused on the physical structure of the dinghy as well, looking for impact marks, transferred DNA, or structural damage that would either validate Brian Hooker's story of rough seas or expose a physical altercation that occurred before Lynette vanished into the dark waters of Aunt Pat's Bay. As the federal government continues its silent, calculated assembly of evidence, the emotional toll on Lynette's daughter, Carly, and her boyfriend, Steve, has reached a critical breaking point, having to endure major milestones like her mother's birthday and Mother's Day without any closure or direct communication from investigators has left the family in a state of profound, exhausting limbo. Carly's anger is compounded by the fact that Brian Hooker remains a free man, residing comfortably back in Michigan, while federal agents treat her mother's beloved sailboat as a designated crime scene wrapped in yellow tape. The family has openly discussed the possibility of eventually presenting Brian with a legal ultimatum, offering to advocate for a reduced sentence in exchange for the absolute truth regarding where Lynette's body is located. This heartbreaking strategy demonstrates the sheer desperation of a family who simply wants to bring their mother home, value closure far above vengeance, and refuse to let her remain lost forever in the shallow keys of the Bahamas. Think about that for a moment, and ask yourself what it says about our current legal framework when a husband can be detained for 5 days by international police, face public accusations of domestic terror from his own stepdaughter, have his personal vessel seized by federal military assets, and yet still walk the streets without a single formal charge. This slow, deliberate pace is frustrating to the public, but it is the hallmark of a high-stakes federal investigation where authorities refuse to move until their case is completely airtight and invulnerable to defense attorneys. Every day that the Soulmate sits at the dock in Fort Pierce, the electronic and physical data inside, it is being converted into an unassailable timeline that will eventually force a confrontation in a court of law. The dark history exposed by Carly, the choking incident in 2014, and the explicit threat to make Lynette disappear at sea has provided federal investigators with the most critical element of any criminal case, a clear, documented motive that aligns perfectly with the physical reality of the disappearance. This brings us to the ultimate, unresolved question that hangs heavily over the entire true crime community as we await the next major development from the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service. When the forensic teams finally finish compiling their data, when the satellite tracking logs are fully decoded, and when the analysis of the crime scene tape around the Soulmate is completed, will the truth finally catch up to Brian Hooker? The official statement from the Coast Guard leaves no room for ambiguity. This is an active, ongoing criminal investigation, and they are actively seeking tips from anyone who observed the couple during their final days in the Bahamas. This case is far from over, and the momentum has completely shifted away from the narrative of an unfortunate maritime accident toward a dark, complex reckoning on the high seas. As we close this comprehensive investigative update, I want to ask for your final theories on how this federal probe will culminate in the coming weeks. Do you believe that federal charges are already drafted and waiting for the final forensic reports from the boat? Or do you think the lack of a recovered body will prolong this painful waiting game for Lynette's family? Please share your final thoughts, your insights, and your support for Carly in the comments section below, as your continued engagement keeps this vital investigation in the national spotlight. If you believe in standing with a grieving family and demanding absolute justice for Lynette Hooker, please take a final moment to share this video across your networks. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a breaking update in this rapidly unfolding federal case.